Hello, everyone, and welcome again, our fourth day of our Earth Week panel. It's actually Earth Day itself. Everybody, happy Earth Day. My name, yes, round of applause, yay. My name is Rob Payo. Today, our panel is going to talk about climate action. And if you need interpretation, please type in the chat. If you see on our screen there, on the lower right, is the interpretation button. Click on that, and Ezzy Dominguez, our interpreter, will be helping you out today. Our lineup today is, we have a really great lineup today. This session will be recorded, and we encourage you to ask questions, put comments in the chat, put your questions in the Q&A. And I also want to thank Hillary Petticord from NOAA for stepping in the last minute. Becca Hathaway from UCAR wasn't able to join us today, and Hillary quickly stepped in. We really appreciate you coming in today, Hillary. Joining us also today is Linda Apple-Lipsius, our Executive Director of Denver Urban Gardens. She will be joining us today and giving us some reflections at the end of our session. Just to give you some context of today's session and why we're doing this panel, and we're doing panels for the entire week. Denver Urban Gardens wants to support its community of gardeners and anyone else that would like to join us for our Earth Week celebration. So we've had several panels, we've asked our friends, our partners, our colleagues, anybody that would want to join us, and people have been so quick to respond. It's been a really great week so far, and today is no different than that. So what I'd like to do is introduce our panelists. I'll have them introduce themselves one at a time. Amanda, let's start with you, please.
Hi, I'm Amanda Slover. I have been practicing organic regenerative practices in the landscape for about 10 years here in Colorado, and I currently work for the Aurora Water Conservation Department in the Xeriscape Garden.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Yeah, Amanda's the real deal, isn't she? Acadia.
Hi everyone, my name is Acadia Tucker and I'm really happy to be here. I'm an author, farmer, and climate activist. I'm a Robadale ambassador, as well as working with a San Francisco-based nonprofit, Stone Pier Press, to produce solutions-oriented news and books.
Yes, and we definitely want to hear about that book, Acadia. So let's make sure we have time for that. Bobby, please get on the mic too.
Hey everyone, happy to be here. My name is Bobby Gill. I am the Director of Development and Communications for a nonprofit called the Savory Institute. The Savory Institute is headquartered in Boulder. I myself live in Denver, but we work all across the globe, working to regenerate global grasslands, and we do that by training farmers and ranchers and pastoralist communities in regenerative grazing practices that we call holistic management.
So great to have you, Bobby. And Hillary, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Hillary Petticord, and I work for the Science on a Sphere team at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So I'm kind of here to broadly talk about climate because we are kind of the horse's mouth when it comes to climate and what's happening. So thank you so much for being here.
Great. All right, Amanda, let's start with you, and we'll learn more about what Aurora Water's doing. Welcome.
Hi, happy Earth Day, everybody. I am really excited to talk to you today about water in the landscape. Like I said a minute ago, my background has been focused on regenerative organic gardening in Colorado for about the last 10 years. In my free time, I teach community conservation in gardens and how to grow from seed to seed. And I am currently thankful to find myself in a 9-to-5 position at Aurora's water conservation team as a horticulture specialist in the Waterwise Garden. Aurora's water conservation team's main message is educating the public on water waste, whether that be finding leaks in homes or businesses or multifamily complexes, We have rebate programs for water reduction inside the home and outside in the landscape. We want to inform Aurora and the greater metro area about plants that can thrive in our climate with very little water use. 50% of home water use is applied to the landscape, and it is our mission in the Aurora Water Wise Garden to promote the efficient use of Aurora's water by educating citizens in water-wise landscape practices. In 2002, when the city was finalizing the construction of Aurora's municipal city hall, there was a severe drought that year. Some of you may remember that citizens were asked at that time to stop watering their landscapes. That event was a wake-up call for our city. Initially, the plans for the municipal campus were to have 10 acres of rolling Kentucky bluegrass and a series of parking lots. The fragility of our water system and ridiculousness of that great lawn was realized, and the plan was scrapped. For those of you who don't know, Kentucky bluegrass requires 27 supplemental inches of irrigation per year here in Aurora. To the city of Aurora's credit, they realized that they had to pivot and be a good example of stewardship of water resources for the city's growing population. The Aurora Water-Wise Garden now resides in 6 of those 10 acres, making it the largest water-wise garden in the Front Range. It's home to 250 species of low water use plants, both natives and non-natives. We like to showcase the variety and bloom times and how lush a water-wise landscape can actually be. Aurora Water envisions the garden as the preeminent educational resource on xeriscape in Colorado. Our garden demonstrates proven xeriscape techniques. While experimenting with new plant material, we utilize the 7 principles of water-wise design. The first principle being planning and design. Oftentimes we think of areas in our landscape as different rooms which have different uses, and that will inform our goal in our design. The second principle of xeriscape design is soil preparation, amending the soil with compost or angular sand or pea gravel, depending on the soil needs of the plants that we're using. The third principle is plant selection, right plant, right place, grouping our plants together by light and water requirements. The fourth principle is practical turf areas. Where do we need to have bare feet touch the ground? That's going to inform what kind of turf we use. The fifth principle of water-wise design is mulch. Rock and wood defines the landscape and has different effects on our soil properties. The sixth principle is efficient irrigation. Creating an irrigation design that suits the need of the space is what water-wise landscape is all about. We want to minimize the amount of water we apply to our landscape spaces. And the final and seventh principle of water-wise design is landscape maintenance. A lot of people feel that water-wise landscapes are really without maintenance, and I can tell you that they are not. Springtime is usually the busiest time when we are managing perennials and grasses, which we often find in the landscape of a xeric design. Last year, because of the pandemic, we were limited in our garden as far as new installations are concerned, but we were still able to add a small Colorado native garden to our space. We're really excited this year to be renovating some other beds creating new spaces, adding new plants and designs to our garden, and continuing our work toward becoming a nationally recognized botanical garden. We are currently program partners with Habitat Heroes, home to many species of birds, including hummingbirds, eastern towhees, chickadees, red-tailed hawks. We have rabbits, coyotes, and deer in here, and a variety of insects.
Amanda, I'm going to stop you there for a
Yeah.
moment. That's really great information. I mean, what it strikes to me is, it's not just I'm going to xeriscape, and you just, you really have to think things through and plan this out. So when people are starting out, how do you, the principles are really great, but how do you start them out? What's sort of a higher level, like, here's to get you started, or what are some key things you really need to think about based on all those?
I think the key thing that you really need to consider when you're planning a transition from bluegrass turf to a water-wise landscape is, what is the space for? Are we entertaining in this space? Are we trying to attract wildlife to this space? Are we hosting a place for native pollinators and insects to be there? Are we looking for, are we trying to block the view from a neighboring yard or a streetscape? So that really informs and begins to create a picture of the space at large and what you're going to do with it.
And I think it's interesting, the materials really matter too, don't they?
Yes.
Of what lends itself to less water use, really.
Right. We often find that shrubs and natives do really well here because they require less water once they're established. Our native shrubs like Fallujah and fernbush do surprisingly well with very few soil amendments or much excessive watering to get established.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
I've got a question about wastewater treatment from Muhammad. I'll hold off on that until you're ready for that. So please continue.
Yeah. In the Aurora Water-wise garden, we do try to limit our irrigation. When irrigation does occur, we do use reclaimed water. For more than 30 years, the Sand Creek Water Reuse Facility in Aurora has provided reclaimed water for irrigation, which has reduced the demand on the city of Aurora's drinking water. The Sand Creek Water Reuse Facility is known as a pioneer in water reuse in the state of Colorado. The city of Aurora was the fourth entity in the state to use reclaimed wastewater for irrigation. After the new Sand Creek plant was rebuilt or modified in 2001, the distribution system went through a major expansion. Today, the Sand Creek Water Reuse Facility operates at 5 million gallons a day. With 26 kilometers of pipe, we are delivering irrigation water to 12 sites within the city of Aurora. In addition to that, reuse water is transported by truck to various green belts throughout our city. One of the sites to use the reclaimed water processed by Sand Creek is the Water-wise Garden here at the Aurora Municipal Center.
That's really, I need to go out there.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, just all the great work you're doing. I do have some questions here now. Paula is asking if someone wants to use, and you kind of alluded to this, but if someone wants to use some grass within the landscape, what kind of species of grass would you recommend? So if you mind using local grass, yeah.
Sure. For bare feet and dogs specifically, I recommend the dog tough grass. It is a hybrid commercial grass. It requires very little water. It kind of has a spongy texture. Dogs can run through it and tear it up, and it refills pretty easily. It doesn't wear as quickly as buffalo grass or blue grama does. It can really withstand the pressure of claws and feet.
Great. And then Muhammad is asking, forgive me, Muhammad, if I'm not asking this correctly, but I think Muhammad is asking about wastewater treatment and what are the cheapest ways of that are out there for that?
For wastewater treatment,
Yeah.
the cheapest ways, as far as in the home, I think the gray water recycling kits are fairly expensive. I would have to research that information and get back to you, maybe send you something, Rob, in an email later.
Okay.
I know that our city does have a program called the Prairie Waters facility where we are able to process the water over and over until exhaustion. So in times of extreme drought, the city can clean the water to such a point that it can be added into the drinking water and continually cleaned that way. But as far as in-home use, I'm not an expert on that, so I would have to find more information.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And Mohammed, chime in if I wasn't capturing that correctly. Anything else you want to share with us, Amanda?
I just want to share that now is not the time for bluegrass lawns any longer. And as our population grows and the drought in the Western United States is predicted to continue, gardeners can really be assured that there is a transition to a lush landscape. And that the Aurora Waterwise garden is a good example of what's possible with a minimal amount of water. That 15 inches of annual rain is not really supplemented much here. And I'd like to invite people to come to our garden. We're in Aurora at Chambers and Alameda. We have volunteer days pretty frequently. You can sign up on auroragov.org through the residents portal, through the water conservation portal. We have a tab for volunteers to register. And I'd like to say thank you for inviting me today to speak on Earth Day about horticulture. That's my passion, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Amanda, once we move on to another speaker, if you put that link into how to volunteer in the chat, that would be great.
Great.
And one final question, in terms of working with nurseries, with landscape companies and those sorts of things in Aurora in particular, what's being done to help with that, in terms of encouraging to use, more drought tolerant grasses? And
well, if you're a citizen of Aurora City, and I'm pretty sure most of the municipalities in the area, in the metro area, have a similar program, but our water conservation program does have a rebate landscape design program. So you can submit for that in the water conservation area of our website. So I'll get that to you. We have a designer who that's her job. She designs landscapes for our citizens. And I'll get more information in the chat.
Yeah, that's great. And then we have one more final question coming in. Do you know of any resources for grasses that would do well in other states?
In other states?
Arizona for dog households.
You can look at High Country Gardens that's a great resource for low water use. You can order online and they'll send it to you. But they have a full catalog, and Dog Tough is on there. Blue Grama is on the website. Buffalo Grass is also on there. And I think they may have one other grass for turf.
Great. Okay, I have one more question from Mohammed, but I'll let you answer that on the Q&A there, Amanda.
Okay.
And
Sure.
I'm going to move over to Acadia. Acadia, so nice to have you and your association with Victory Gardens. Go ahead.
Hi guys, thanks for having me. It is really nice to be here on Earth Day. It's nice to kind of celebrate in a collaborative manner, sharing all these awesome ideas. As I mentioned, I do write books on climate victory gardening. And with that is a focus revolving around growing good food in a way that can help actually park atmospheric carbon underground. And it's something that we can all do, which is really exciting. I kind of fell into my love and passion for soil accidentally when I moved to Washington State to start my first organic market garden. It just so turned out that the land we had kind of agreed to farm sight unseen was kind of covered in a layer of gravel, construction fill, years of soil buildup over really thick landscaping fabric. So we really had to think on our toes and learn how to create our own soil from the ground up. So in the years since I started to grow food, I did start to think of myself as a regenerative farmer. And that's because everything I did on the farm was definitely directed towards regenerating and rebuilding the soil we either didn't have or were building ourselves. And I learned really quickly that this practice gave me more resilient plants, all while using way less water and practically no artificial inputs like chemical fertilizers, and even less insecticides and pesticides as well. So my favorite part though is that I learned it allowed me to become part of a solution to global warming, and that the soil I was nourishing was acting more and more like a giant carbon sponge. And the reason that we can kind of park this carbon underground is with the relationships between plants and soil organisms. And it just so turns out that plants are the ultimate and, quite frankly, the cheapest way to suck excess carbon dioxide out of the air. Almost all atmospheric carbon passes through plants during photosynthesis. And this is the process that turns carbon, sunlight, and water into sugars and carbohydrates that plants use to grow. But the plus side is that plant roots actually release some of these carbon-rich sugars to feed soil organisms in the soil and keep them around the base of their roots. And in exchange, these soil organisms make nutrients available that the plants otherwise wouldn't have access to. So it's a really symbiotic relationship. In addition, as plants die back each winter, they tend to drop leaves, branches, and even a substantial amount of the roots die back, which further feed this vast community of soil organisms, which in turn adds even more nutrients and carbon back into the soil. There's strong evidence to suggest that when these living organisms actually die, their carbon-rich bodies stay underground as long as the soil is undisturbed. So that's how you get this long-term carbon storage underground. But again, the key message here is you kind of have to let the soil be and leave it alone. So that, again, this alliance between plants and soil organisms is what is locking this carbon underground, all while creating fertile and arable land. And increasing this carbon stored in soil also helps to maximize photosynthesis, so plants can continue to draw down even more carbon trapped underground. One of my favorite byproducts that I noticed on my farm by cultivating this carbon-rich soil was that it also tended to feed a population of mycorrhizae, which is a vast network of fungi that releases glomalin. Now, glomalin is a fancy word for this sticky gum-like substance that actually helps to bind together soil particles, which are sand, silt, and clay, and they create a soil structure that helps to conserve moisture and hold on to even more nutrients. So, after a few years of doing this, the plants that I raised, meaning, with easy access to moisture, to nutrients, they were sturdier and more resilient. And again, the farms just started to take care of itself. this positive cycle is really how nature works when we just don't interfere. So kind of taking your cues from nature and using that to the best of your ability. And I know Bobby's going to talk a lot more about regenerative practices, so I don't want to go too deep into it. But it really is a powerful practice, and it could allow farms to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at a rate of about 1 ton of carbon for every acre. That number does fluctuate depending on who you're talking to or where you're talking about, but it is strong evidence to suggest that, you know, agriculture has this immense power to do some really good for the climate. The problem is conventional farming really does the opposite. Farming practices like tilling and excessive chemical use deplete and erode the soil and actually releases the stored carbon back into the atmosphere, dramatically increasing greenhouse gas emissions. In 2011, farms were responsible for emitting 6 billion tons of greenhouse gases, and that's about 13% of the global greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, according to the World Resource Institute. So, you know, big ag is a big part of the climate problem. And the fact that carbon farming could help reverse global warming is both exciting and extremely frustrating because, like I said, we are dealing with an agriculture system that does not prioritize our health, our environment, or our climate concerns. The good news is farmers aren't the only ones who can opt for this regenerative approach. Many of us have our own patches of soil that we can tend to, whether it be yards, community gardens, or even in some cases, containers. Carbon farmer Eric Tosmere estimates that his own backyard garden, which is only about 1/3 acre, can offset his personal emissions for the year. So I always like to say with a call of action, you know, if we all can band together and grow good food in our own backyards, you know, our gardens may be small, but as a cumulative action, they can be quite mighty. And I kind of got the idea of a climate victory garden. I did not invent it myself, but it harkens back to the days of World War I and World War II, where every average citizens were asked to grow their own food to help with meager rations during the war. Also, food transport was shut down as munitions and soldier transport became more important. So citizens were asked by the government to actually help and grow their own food. And it was quite remarkable. By the end of World War II, there were over 20 million victory gardens producing over 40% of the nation's food. So to me, that just goes to show what collective action can do. And I make it my life's work to kind of go out there and, you know, advocate for everybody to start growing their own food at home.
Thanks, Acadia. We recently did a panel on Kiss the Ground, the documentary.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, the information is starting to get out there. In terms of yours getting the word out, do you notice a change? Are people more receptive? Are they more aware? Or where are we at? You know, in
sure.
terms
I mean,
of awareness
I think
on this?
one of the silver linings of this global pandemic is it really did create this home gardening boon. And, you know, whether the reasons they got into gardening was, you know, to keep them occupied while they were at home or to just try a new hobby while they were, you know, kind of stuck in isolations, I think it's actually transitioned over to being more curious about your soil, about the food you grow, about our food system in general. And I think that has a really positive impact that will last longer than the pandemic. So it's nice to see that, you know, I really feel it won't be a fad, and that people will continue to be interested and continue to want to learn more about what they can do, either in terms for their own health, for their community's health, or for their soil's health.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit more about the book. Can you break it down a little bit about your process and
Sure. So I have 3 books out at the moment. The first one focuses on perennials because perennials do have this amazing power with their robust root systems to support these vast communities of soil organisms that I like to talk about all the time. The second book is more focusing on just backyard carbon farming, as I call it. And the third book is about container gardening. As I started to talk more and more about, you know, everybody's individual power to help sequester even just a little bit of carbon, I realized I was leaving out a really large group of people, whether they live in cities, they don't have access to yards. And I wanted to give them the tools and information that they could use to grow their own good food in containers, whether it be indoors or outdoors. And I will say this, I'm not going to oversell container gardens' ability to sequester carbon, but I do view them as a means to mitigate some of the issues that we are already seeing with climate change, and that's most notably supporting our pollinators. So the idea is a patchwork of container gardens in urban areas can go a really long way to feeding and protecting our local pollinator populations.
That's great. I didn't realize you had so many books. I thought there was just one. You've been busy, Acadia.
I have, and I put a moratorium on them for the moment so that I could focus more on, spreading the word a little bit.
Yeah.
Instead of being hunkered down in my room.
Well, yeah, clearly you to get all that you've worked it hard. Laura is pointing out just this history of Victory Gardens is really interesting, and that she's pointing out that Denver was one of the top cities producing food in World War I.
That's awesome.
At Victory Gardens. So yeah, can you talk a little bit more about the backyard garden book, and what are some recommendations that we can walk away with in terms of strengthening our soil, if there's particular plants that we should consider to support the soil, and I just again want to put it out there for people. If you have questions, please type them in the chat. So,
yeah, one of the things I like to tell backyard gardeners all the time is, I found it was really difficult for people to give up their beloved rototillers. They kind of saw this as the only means of prepping their soil in the spring and getting things ready to plant. So I kind of offer alternative methods to soil prep. One of my favorites being the lasagna mulch system, where you use, you cut your lawn down to as short as possible. You use a layer of cardboard, and then you just start piling on all types of organic materials in kind of an alternating pattern of brown things like leaves and green things like grass clippings. And you can kind of top that off with a layer in compost that will allow you to directly seed into that pile. And over the course of the season, you'll start to see that pile shrink and actually just be turned into soil and composted soil right in front of your eyes. And I like to tote too that, in my opinion, building your soil up that way is actually a lot easier than the physical process of rototilling. It's more of a passive way, if you will, to get much better results. And then of course, the end goal being you're nourishing your soil, you're helping it draw more carbon down. And then by not disturbing it, you're keeping it there.
Yeah, I think some of it is just, we do it because that's what we think
it's just what you've always done. Exactly.
Yeah, but there are alternatives. Yeah. Anything else you'd like to share, Acadia?
No, I'd just like to end with, I can never end a speech without saying, I motivate all of you, each and every one of you, even those who say I have a black thumb, I kill plants, I can't do it, to just try. Even if you just start with one plant and work your way up, even if it dies 3 times, just keep trying because the reward is amazing for you and for the environment.
Amen. I'll attest to that as a new gardener. So, Acadia, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So now we're going to shift into a bigger perspective of regenerative agriculture. Bobby, you have the floor.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Yeah. So, here with Denver Urban Gardens, and, I come in Savory Institute. We work on the grasslands worldwide. And so, it seems like we're talking in different contexts, but really there's a lot of similarities, which I'm going to hopefully get into a little bit. But I wanted to start off a bit and talk about grasslands and why they are important, not just, the grass that you have in your backyard, but really grasslands, rangelands, pastures, prairies, this vital ecosystem for planetary health. Grasslands represent 1/3 of the Earth's landmass. So that's 5 billion hectares or 12.5 billion acres. That's a massive amount of land. And some estimates say that up to 70% of those grasslands are dying and turning to desert, a process known as desertification. When that happens, those grasslands become less and less productive. More bare ground exists, which releases carbon into the atmosphere, further contributing to climate change. That bare ground radiates heat, which changes the microclimates and the macroclimates in terms of the evapotranspiration cycles. There's a lot of different pieces at play. Not to mention that grasslands are a huge, massive source of food for many of us and for billions of people who live directly on those grasslands. The organization that I work for, the Savory Institute, we work at the global scale to regenerate these global grasslands. We do this by teaching a method known as holistic planned grazing. Acadia mentioned the film Kiss the Ground earlier. And if you haven't seen that on Netflix, I would highly recommend it. It is a wonderful documentary. In the documentary, they follow around a rangeland ecologist from Zimbabwe. His name is Alan Savory. He's actually the founder of our organization and the president of the organization. I work with him very closely. But he basically recognized in the 1960s, he was working actually as a game tracker and an ecologist in Zimbabwe, and he would walk around barefoot a lot of the time, strangely enough. He did that for tracking game because he felt that it allowed him to move a little more delicately and quietly and be able to, approach game as he needed to. But what he noticed is that the land felt very different depending on if he was walking on land that was covered in vegetation or if he was walking on absolutely exposed bare ground. That there was a very distinct temperature difference. And in his tracking, he also noticed different things like the hoof prints where, grazing herbivores had been, when cattle had been in an area or when wildebeest or elephant or whatever. There's a tendency for their hooves to break up the tough soils. And when that happens, it allows water to then penetrate into the soils and the land eventually starts to regenerate. Ultimately, what he realized is there is this misperception that exists about livestock and grazing herbivores, whether that be cows or bison or sheep or goats, any number of ruminant species. Many people, and I think a lot of us here, we've heard that cows are bad. They are destroying the planet. They are burping methane. They are degrading the land. Things like that. What people are missing in that conversation is that the movement of the animals across the land matters. If you look back to what existed on our grasslands for millennia before humans came along, there used to be massive, massive herds of grazing herbivores. In North America, for example, there used to be 75 million approximately bison that used to roam across North America. Because of their natural predators, which are wolves, they would stay in these tightly bunched herds. They would graze the grasses. Their urine and dung would act as that natural fertilizer or compost. Their hooves would break up the capped soils, allowing water to penetrate into it. They would trample down grasses that they didn't eat, which would cause a natural mulching effect for the land to allow that water and fertilization to stay and incorporate into the land. And when they were done, they would move on to fresh pasture. And they wouldn't return until those grasses had fully regrown and their root structures down below had fully recuperated and recovered as well. So this notion that livestock or grazing herbivores are bad for the environment is predicated essentially on factory farming. Factory farming, of course, is an abhorrent practice that I think many of us would agree we need to get rid of. The problem is the factory farming of livestock is being used to vilify all livestock. And in the case of global grasslands, if we want grasslands to thrive and exist, grasslands co-evolved with grazing herbivores, and they must be grazed for those grasslands to maintain their vitality. That movement across the land, the animal impact as the herd moves across, grazes it down, mulches it with the litter, fertilizes it. That's what's necessary for grasslands to thrive. And it's the removing of those animals from grasslands that causes them to deteriorate. When you leave a strand of grass standing ungrazed on a piece of land, eventually it's going to oxidize and die off. When you have tufts of grass that are oxidized, they block sunlight from reaching new seedlings of grass from growing. So you need to graze that away so that it can always be actively photosynthesizing. If you remove the animals, there is no one to graze that land and to keep that cycle of life happening on the grasslands. So at the Savory Institute, what we do is we work with farmers and ranchers and pastoralist communities. You know, we could be working with the Maasai in Kenya, or gauchos in Patagonia, or cowboys here in Colorado. They all have very different contexts in what they do, but there is a common thread that they are managing grazing herbivores and grasslands. And those two have co-evolved together for millions of years. Now, we're not going to go out there and say, okay, just let your animals roam free, because what has happened is those herds of bison, for example, that used to exist in North America don't exist anymore. And their predators that used to exist that kept those massive herds bunched up and regularly moving, those predators aren't there anymore. And we've built roads and cities and infrastructure and fences that gets in the way of those ancestral migratory patterns. So we can't just let nature totally do its thing in a hands-off approach at this rangeland scale. There needs to be an active component in terms of mimicking those ancestral migratory patterns that herbivores used to exhibit. So what we do with farmers and ranchers is we teach them what is called holistic planned grazing. And so instead of wolves, for example, keeping the animals bunched up, we will use portable electric fencing. Or we will use herders who walk with the animals and keep them bunched up, or shepherding like you do with sheep. And you do that according to a grazing plan. And the grazing plan basically matches the amount of available forage with the number of animals and the amount of forage that they need for their diets. And then you factor in the recovery rates that are necessary for the types of grasses that exist on that landscape. And then we have a big spreadsheet where you kind of mark everything and do a bunch of math, and you can map it all out and you plan your movements so that you move the animals across a landscape and factoring in all the different considerations. It's not just a rotation that moves around, but you're considering like, oh, there are ground nesting birds over here in this pasture that are hatching at this time of year. So we're going to skip over that pasture and move over to this one. And then we'll come back to that later in the year when it's more appropriate. And then, when I want to go on vacation, we need a little more time. So we're going to move them into the big pasture because they'll get a couple more days out of that. There's all these different complexities of managing land and livestock together. And that's essentially what we do at the Savory Institute. We have influenced, through our organization, we have 48 regional learning centers around the world, working with farmers and ranchers of all different types under all different impact models. We have trained a little over 12,000 people, and we've regenerated over 32 million acres through our programs. What that means for carbon sequestration and, activating that soil carbon sponge to be able to soak up water and recharge underground aquifers, what it means for providing more nutrient dense food to communities that depend on this. All of these things tie back to how we manage our global grasslands. And grasslands have to be grazed if we want them to be abundant and thriving and giving life, not just to us as humans, but to all the different species that exist on grasslands. You often hear the argument that, cows take up X amount of land. Well, if they're in a feedlot or a factory, yes, they do take up land, and that is displacing wildlife habitat. But if you have cows out on pasture and they are properly managed, if you've ever walked across a ranch that is properly managed and there is lush green vegetation growing, there's butterflies and bees and birds and snakes and rabbits, and there is all kinds of life that coexists because of the grazing and the impact that those grazing herbivores provide to the global grasslands. So that's a little bit about what we do at the Savory Institute. We also work with brands to help them, brands that are starting to get interested in regenerative agriculture. We help connect them in with the farmers and ranchers around our global network so that they can access that supply and help bring more products to market that are regenerative. For example, we just announced today, if you know UGG boots, it's the sheepskin boots. They just announced a partnership with us where they are committing to regenerating 1 million acres by 2025 by totally revamping their supply chain. And they're going to do that by sourcing through us. And, we work, whether it's in textiles with, leather or wool or meat or dairy. These are all products that come off of our global grasslands. Of course, there are other products that exist in other land-based types like croplands and forestry and gardening. Savory Institute, we keep our focus on the grasslands because they're an often underappreciated landscape at the global scale, but they do provide tremendous value in terms of balancing out this climate crisis that we're in and the water crisis and everything else. Just to throw out a few stats before I close, there is a lot of research out there showing that this properly managed grazing has the potential to sequester massive amounts of carbon. And this is research that is doing life cycle analysis of all the greenhouse gas emissions going into and out of a land base. And it's looking like properly managed grazing can sequester around 3 tons of carbon per hectare per year. I guess I could convert that to acres, but I'm not going to do math right now. But that's a lot of carbon. And when you multiply that times 5 billion hectares, that's a tremendous amount of carbon drawdown in terms of reversing the climate crisis we're in. On the waterfront, if you increase 1 acre, if you increase soil organic matter by just 1%, that land has the potential to hold 20,000 more gallons of water within it. So by properly managing lands, improving the types of vegetation that is growing so that there is more dense, diverse, and vibrant vegetation growing on that land, you get more biodiversity down in the soil as well. It holds more water, more life all around, and better for all of us.
Wow, Bobby, that was great. I want to make sure Hillary has her time, but I do have one question for you. Sure. You so wonderfully explained, this whole process globally. I'm wondering more locally, or at least in Colorado, how does this tie into the growth in Colorado, and how can we be more intentional about sustainability?
Yeah. Well, Savory Institute does have a hub here in Colorado. A lot of the ranching happens out on the western slope. There's a lot of it out there. Of course, there's a lot on the eastern plains as well. Our hub in Colorado is based in Gunnison. It works with a lot of the ranchers out there on the western slope, but they do get into the Front Range periodically to offer some courses. They're mostly grazing courses, for farmers or ranchers, people who are managing livestock, to teach them those methods. When people ask me how to get involved, I say, vote with your dollar. Look for products that are regenerative in nature. We have products that, like I said, we work with, UGG or Timberland boots, or, Epic Bar, or there's Alexander Dairy that you pick up at Whole Foods. There's all kinds of different ways that you can support regenerative agriculture. I'll share a link in the chat to a buying guide that the Savory Institute has put together with just some of the brands that we work with, in case you want to go, browse the products that they have and see what's available. Regenerative, I think, is still fairly new on the scene in terms of the collective consciousness of all of us, but those of us that are working with farmers and working with brands, we're really working to build that capacity so that regenerative can become more of a mainstay in our day-to-day actions. And what we buy sends signals back to the farmers and the brands that this is what we care about, and that's what they're going to put their resources into.
Right on. And right on, UGG boots. Bobby, thank you so much. Yeah, put that link on there. I'm going to pass the baton over to Hillary. She's going to share her slides. I also want you to know that we have a discount for Acadia's books. I'll put the link on there and the discount code for her newest book. Hillary, the floor is yours, though. And again, thank you for joining us last minute.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here, and happy Earth Day. I'm lucky to be here with such stunning do-gooders. I'm trying to throw in a little bit of a different kind of talk, which I was asked to do yesterday, but I'm always happy to oblige a good invitation. So I'm bringing up the climate caboose here, giving you a more broad perspective of actions that need to be done to reach the point where carbon in the atmosphere and ocean begins to decrease. So at the end, we'll make a solemn personal pledge. So start thinking about some things that that are meaningful to you as I go on. So first, just quickly, who am I? Who's this talking to you? I like to include the picture up on the top right for a number of reasons. It kind of disarms
Hillary, I'm going to
me.
stop you. We are not seeing your slides.
Oh, okay. Bummer.
And Rob?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if others can.
I can see the slides with the QR code and the picture
Oh,
skiing
okay.
in the corner.
Oh, my bad then. All righty.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the picture in the upper right, basically I have been a skier all my life, and I'm very attached to weather and climate, which is how I ended up at NOAA. If you're not aware, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration does have a research center in Boulder, so go check it out when we're able to open back up. But really what I do is typically work on this project with the upper right, the upper left picture, Science on a Sphere. So we've been, for about 15 years, we've been putting out this museum exhibit to museums around the world, and essentially trying to educate folks on this complicated and complex Earth system interactions. We decided to move to a smaller version called SOS Explorer, and then finally to SOS Explorer Mobile. So you can see a lot of data visualizations if you use the QR code or just go to the App Store there. All right, so now you know on a normal day, I actually educate on our complex Earth system from a very broad global perspective, focusing typically on the problems and how we know what we know as scientists. So I need to go outside of NOAA to look for solutions specifics, because I think that's what you've come here today to learn about. And I was just informed that NOAA started an atmospheric and marine carbon dioxide removal task force. So I don't know what that's about. It's brand new. I'm excited to learn about it. But for clear and concise solutions, I recommend Project Drawdown. Drawdown is a book by Paul Hawken about climate solutions. And it led to this project for educating folks on the feasibility and exact actions that we need to take as a society and as a planetary species to reverse the effects of climate change. The overall framework for Drawdown's climate solutions are broken broadly into these three areas. So first, reduce sources. 2, support sinks. And 3, improve society. So sources are those things that put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Sinks are those that pull carbon dioxide out. And then improving society turns out to be a really important piece of the puzzle. So Climate Solutions 101 is what I actually suggest to go to. There are 6 units broken into 15-minute videos and supplemental information that I'm showing you today. So first we have to figure out what exactly does the carbon emissions pie look like, so that we can choose the sectors where you believe you can make the most change. So we see this food and agriculture land use is number 2. So that's fantastic that we're talking about that today in such detail. Then there's of course electricity, industry, transportation, buildings, and other. So I'm going to throw these out really quickly to see if you can find one or maybe many solutions that you can work into your life. So please go to this link down here if you want to learn more on an effective time scale. So public transit. efficient trucks, hybrid cars, electric cars, walkable cities, bicycle infrastructure, high-speed rails, electric bikes. These are some of the things that they recommend as transportation solutions. For building solutions, we really need to focus pretty heavily in rural countries where on clean cook stoves. And then there's also things that apply to all of us, like insulation, high efficiency heat pumps, glass, thermostats, automating your systems, solar hot water. For food and agriculture land use solutions, the two biggies that I think are really notable for personal and individual planning is food waste and plant-rich diets. Thank you to all the speakers before me who went into these, some of these other ones in more detail. For example, shifting agricultural practices and protecting ecosystems. So these are really important things that we should be really getting behind. And it's an interesting talk to have a discussion or a brainstorming session with your friends about what does it mean to get behind something, right? Does it mean that you need to vote? Does it mean that you need to advocate or work in the streets or climate protest or whatever it is that it means for you to get behind some of these real big circles? And I didn't go into the supporting sinks because of time, which is, by the way, a very fascinating topic that you can find in Unit 4 in 101. But I did want to quickly mention this idea of improving society as a solution. So fostering equality and education with girls around the globe can give long-term climate benefits apart from just being the right thing to do. Educated girls may have fewer children later in life, and although population doesn't seem to be the biggest driver, in other words, poor folks are not contributing the most to carbon in the atmosphere, but rather rich folks or rich societies. But it's certainly important to address population and healthy societies. So I have this link. There's two links, actually. One, I believe Rob is going to put in the chat both of them. One of them is a Jamboard that I'm going to turn over to and see what you all have to say for your pledge today to continue to do something. But if you need more information in order to make that pledge, I recommend this personal action guide for the environment. And you can just kind of scroll down. Has a lot to do with what you can do in these sectors, in these important sectors. So I'm gonna quickly just kind of move over to the Jamboard here.
So you'll see the link in the chat there. If you haven't used a Jamboard before, there are Post-its on the left-hand side. You just click on one of those and place them onto the board itself. Type in your Post-it notes, and I'll be there to help organize things a little bit.
Hey, Rob, I'm not sure if this is what other folks are experiencing, but I show that I'm only able to view it. I'm not able to edit it.
Oh, shucks. Okay. Let me change that real quick. Hopefully I can.
It's a view only mode. Yes. Yeah.
There we go. Sorry about that, friends.
So if you refresh that, you should be able to type in there. So let's see.
Yeah. So
there we go.
I pledge today to ... And I just wanted to mention that in general, I am not a solutions expert, and luckily, because we don't have any time for questions, but I do recommend if you have things that you really want to know about climate, these are three of the resources that I appreciate: Climate Central, climate.gov, and Project Drawdown. Those kind of incorporate some of my favorite parts of the discussion, essentially.
And Hillary, I put in the guide, the action guide that you suggested as well. And we'll include those resources, all the resources from today, we'll include those in a follow-up email for everyone. So as people are typing in their pledges, Hillary, you have the final word. What would you like to say on this Earth Day?
Yeah, I just really appreciate that you are interested in this topic. And I think on Earth Day, we're reminded that we can talk to anyone about this stuff anytime that you get a chance to be social again. This is a fantastic conversation. And if you tell your friends about all the great things that you're doing, we're all going to, it's kind of the word of mouth thing that when people you look up to, like these wonderful people on this panel, are doing amazing things, it makes you want to do amazing things. So spread the word and have really deep conversations on this issue.
Hillary, thank you. And again, thank you for coming in last minute. It was really great to have this information and to have you. It's always good to see you, Hillary. And it looks like people were really listening today. We've got a lot of, I pledged today to plant more flowers, pollinators, get rid of my rototiller, creative garden for native pollinators. Very good. Well, as those pledges continue, I'm going to pass it over to our executive director, Doug's executive director, Linda Apolipsius. Linda, take us home.
Right on. Hey, thank you, everybody. This was absolutely fascinating panel. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Yeah, just a couple summary words, just to sort of mirror what Hillary said. I think just keep educating yourself. There's so much to learn. Keep being curious. Keep sharing everything with your friends. It's a big topic, but try to bring it home. Take time to bring it home and see how you can impact things, in your backyard, because you can make a difference, even though it feels overwhelming. There's definitely space to make impact. And which takes me to just a little note on Denver Urban Gardens and what we're doing. So 35-year-old organization with 188 community gardens across Denver. We've greened 32 acres of Denver and practicing regenerative and organic practices in all of our gardens. We're really excited as we're expanding our scope from community gardens to gardening in community. And inviting, everybody into this gardening world. As Acadia said, you can make a difference just in your backyard. So we've got loads of resources at doug.org, as well as tapping into the resources of our amazing speakers. So thank you so much. Get out there, dig in the soil. Let's keep rebuilding the soil and doing our part every day. Happy Earth Day.
Thanks, Linda. Be sure to join us for our last panel. Allison was asking, is this going to be available, the recording? Yes, it is. We'll have it on our website as soon as we can. Go to doug.org Earth Week. You can see it there in the chat. Thanks, Brittany. Thank you so much. We're over time, so I want to respect everyone's time. Panelists, thank you. Everyone that's participated so far, thank you again. We'll see you tomorrow at noon, okay, for health and wellness. Bye, everyone.